Namaste and Jai Shri Ram. Hope all of you are doing good. We are aware that in ancient Bharat, there was no discrimination between the various Varnas and Jatis that are wrongly called as the caste system today. All the four Varnas, the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, lived in perfect peace and harmony and contributed immensely in their own ways to society, community, and the nation. Most importantly, one's Varna did not depend on one's birth but purely on one's actions and qualities. Thus, our Shastras are replete with examples of how those born in Brahmin families became Shudras and those born in Shudra families became Vaishya, Kshatriya, or Brahmin. We can see that Valmiki, the author of the Ramayana, was a hunter. And today's Valmiki caste, which is considered a scheduled caste, consider him as their progenitor. Similarly, Vyasdev, the author of the Mahabharata and the compiler of the four Vedas, was someone who was born of a fisherwoman named Satyavati, which would today be considered as a Shudra community. Yet both Valmiki and Vyasdev are considered as the greatest of the greatest rishis. In fact, Guru Purnima is also called as Vyas Purnima because of the fact that Vyasdev is considered as the Guru of the Gurus. In fact, not just that, even women in Vedic Bharat enjoyed far greater rights than today. Thus, we can see that they could wear the Upanayan, the sacred thread, were great scholars, those who not just read but even taught the Vedas. Of course, we all know that many of the Vedic mantras were attributed to women seers. But coming back to the so-called discrimination between the various varnas or jatis as it is called today, we can see that in none of our Shrutis, the Vedas and Upanishads, nor in the Smritis, be it the Itihasas, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, or the major Purans, does one find any kind of discrimination in them. What to say the fact that both the authors of the Itihasas themselves came from Shudra backgrounds but yet are considered as the greatest saints today. Ancient Bharat was definitely the most perfect and the most ideal place to be. However, it is true that some, but not all, of the Dharma Shastras, such as the Manu Samhita, which appear much later, do have passages which are definitely discriminatory towards Shudras and women. But on the other hand, they also have contradictory passages where women are extolled and glorified. That's the reason why many scholars consider the Manu Samhita to have many passages which were doctored at a later date. But Dharma Shastras would never enjoyed the same status as the other Smritis. What to speak of Shrutis that are infallible? That's why it is definitely clear that if one leaves out the Dharma Shastras, which are of a later period and do not carry much significance, there is definitely no discrimination mentioned in our earlier Shastras. So therefore, the genuine question arises over here. When exactly did this discrimination between the various Varnas and Jatis, or caste discrimination as it is called today, when did they actually begin? Here we would also like to emphasize that there was no such thing as untouchable or Dalit mentioned anywhere in any Shastra, not even the Dharma Shastras. We know that Megasthenes, the Greek ambassador to Bharat, who lived over here for several years and came during the reign of Chandragupta Maurya in the 4th century, he mentions that Bharat was the only country in the ancient world where slavery does not exist. He does mention various castes, but does not mention of any discrimination or caste rigidity. In fact, many scholars are of the opinion that the Mauryan dynasty themselves had Shudra origins, but due to the dint of their achievements and qualities, they became known as among the greatest Kshatriyas. As we all know that Megasthenes was in fact all praise for Bharat and the wonderful, splendid city of Patliputra, which he said had few parallels elsewhere in the ancient world. It is equally important to know that this was the time that a large chunk of the country, this was a time before a large part of the country had turned Buddhist. For in the reign of Chandragupta Maurya, the country was principally Hindu. So if there was no casteism or discrimination even during the Mauryan rule, when did it arise? No less a person than Baba Sahib Ambedkar, who was very critical of Hinduism in many respects, conceded that the egalitarian spirit of the Vedic ancient Bharat and says that discrimination of and untouchability starts somewhere between the 2nd and the 5th centuries. And he may have a point. For Fa Xian, the Chinese pilgrim, traveled to Bharat during the 4th century and was the first to make mention of Chandals, the outcasts. While Chandals are also mentioned in the Mahabharata and some Dharma shastras, their situation was not as bad as mentioned by Fa Xian, who casts them completely out as a community that were severely discriminated. And the reason provided by Fa Xian is because they went hunting and ate meat. Now, there are no doubts that while our Shastras do recommend a vegetarian diet, and vegetarianism has always existed in our country since times immemorial, it is also a reality that Kshatriyas and Shudras did consume meat. The Kshatriya kings had a long tradition of going on shikar, but yes, most Brahmins and Vaishyas did not eat meat. But with the advent of Buddhism through the efforts of Ashoka, a large part of the country became vegetarian, and many of them became Buddhist. This continued even after the Mauryan dynasty's fall and the rise of the Songs and the Guptas. So when Fa Xian visited Bharat, the vast majority of the country were actually vegetarian. Fa Xian says that the bulk of the people did not just not eat meat, but did not even consume onions and garlic. Neither did they drink wine. But he regards the he writes about the Chandals that they were regarded as social outcasts, being the only persons to go hunting and dealing in flesh. They lived far away from the people, and when they approached a city or market, they had to strike a piece of wood so that other folk may avoid coming in contact with them. Later travelers of pre-Muslim rule also mentioned other outcasts here and there. But the most important point was that they were definitely few in number. So the question arises, when and how did their numbers grow to such a big extent that we see today in the form of low castes and scheduled castes? How did they become so sizable in number? We would be examining that part and other aspects of how birth-based caste discrimination became more entrenched as time went by in our next video. Dhanyavad, Jai Shri Ram.